Hey everybody, Ron Circus here with you. Before we get started, this is a really kind of entry-level tutorial, and it specifically focuses on PaintShop Pro. We're just going to be talking about some of the basics with layers, and going over them, specifically a request from Christy, who wanted to see some things here. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. If you're a Photoshop user, if you're an advanced user, watching this video may not be the best use of your time. Alright? Now that I've gone ahead and made half of you stop watching, let's get to it. First off, every image that I make, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, is 2000 by 2000 pixels. Okay? And the reason I make things 2000 at 2000 is because I really like working big. Okay? I make them in pixels. This is our units here. It's pixels, 2000 by 2000. Image characteristics, raster background, not a vector or an art media background, but a raster background. If you watch the video I made before this, it specifically talks about the difference between raster and vector. Art media is something specific to PaintShop Pro, and I'll be honest with you, it's one of those things I've never messed around with. Okay, I always set my background for transparent. Okay, and there we go. The next thing I'll do is, of course, as you've probably seen in the past, I will go ahead and I will flood fill with the paint bucket tool. Okay, my background is black. Alright. Now, the first thing that we want to do is have an idea in our head of where we're going. So what I have done here is I've actually got some pictures and put them aside for this. Okay. And we'll put together just something seriously basic. I'll talk about two different kind of concepts, and then we'll add some eye candy and go ahead at that point. So, back in here, here's our image. This is going to be our avatar eventually. The first thing we'll do is I just grabbed a really basic kind of background texture. Alright? If I Control A, okay, that selects the entire image. Obviously, I can also use my edit menu for this, okay? But I just want to Control A, that selects the entire image, Control C, which copies it, and then I'm going to bring it over here, and I'm going to hit Control L, which copies whatever I have on my clipboard as a new layer. Now, over here on my layers palette on the left, you can actually see what I'm up to, and now I've got two layers. I've got a raster layer 1 and a raster layer 2. Now, one of the things to remember, especially when you're first getting started, I'm just going to go ahead and shrink this down here to land on our canvas. Okay. One of the things to remember when you're first getting started is it's a super good idea to go in here, and if you single click on the actual name here, I can write background, and I can rename my layers. And it might be a good idea when you first get started to go ahead and start naming your layers in a way that you can actually remember. Okay. There we go. Now, I'm not going to keep that up because I'm pretty much lazy. So, now we've got our first layer. One of the things to know about exactly what layers are and what they do, and if you don't actually understand the concept of layers, there's an absolute beginner's guide to making an avatar that I do in paint.net, but explains the layers concept. So if you don't actually understand what layers are, go and watch that first. This is just about how they operate in PaintShop Pro. Okay, so I've now got an image open here in a background. Alright. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open another image I grabbed, and I grabbed a clock. How original is that? Control A, Control C, and again Control L, and that is now pasted it as a new layer. Okay, like I did before, I'm just going to try and get these around the same size. Doesn't really matter, we're not going to get too technical here. So now I've got two images on separate layers. The first thing is I can drag these layers and drop them to reorder them. Okay, so if I grab my texture and I put that below and let go, it'll move that above and below. That gets really important. The other thing to know is in my layers palette I've got a little percentage here. This is its opacity. So I'm going to actually drop the texture behind the clock, shrink the clock, and I'm going to start dragging this little percentage sign down, and what that does is fades that layer's visibility, or its opacity, how opaque it is. So what we're actually doing there, we hit Control L, we create a new layer by default, and then we can go ahead and just lower or raise the opacity of any given layer. One of the basic advantages of layers is we have the opportunity to do things to a certain part of the image without doing it to the rest of the image. Okay, and specifically what we mean here is I can grab this clock, I can adjust its brightness and contrast separately of that background layer. Okay, you start to understand why that becomes an advantage, particularly when we start putting human skin tones over these things. It starts to become a little more apparent why we have this ability and why it's important to keep every layer separate. Okay, now when I've got my layers here and I like it, some people when they first start out, they just say, oh, that looks perfect, I don't want to lose that, and they merge the layers. So we've got the ability to merge down. If we right click our topmost layer, merge down, I've got a few different options. I got merge visible, which means it'll merge all three layers, because any layer that's visible will become a single layer. I've got the ability to merge all, which in this case does the same as merge visible because I don't have any hidden layers. And then I've got merge down, which just takes this layer and moves it down and combines it with the other layer. So if I hit merge down now, you can see I've only got two layers here, the background and that mixed layer. Okay? That can be really helpful as you're starting out, but you're going to find really quickly you don't want to do that too much. Okay? Now if I hit Control Z, what I'm doing with Control Z is obviously just undoing my steps. I'm back to my two steps here. Now another thing to keep in mind is every layer in your layer palette has a little eyeball, and if I click on it, I've got the ability to hide that layer. Okay, that can come in handy if you're doing some work on the back and you don't want to look at that. You don't want to, go ahead and reorder them. Just click on it, get it out of the way, do your edits on the layer. Okay. So what I am going to do here is I'm just going to grab this raster layer with my awesome clock on it. I'm going to go ahead and desaturate the color on that, so it becomes almost black and white. Mixes with that background a little bit better, and I can just fade down that opacity a little bit more. You start to see a lot of this kind of looking stuff on halves. There's no shame in it. You hear me make a lot of jokes about clocks. It's just because they're so overused. Clocks in and of themselves are wonderful things. And I don't just say that because I'm stoned. There we go. So, now I've got this all together here. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at putting a model down. So, I've got the ability here to just grab yet another picture. Okay, and I've got her here. And again, we'll hit Control A, Control C to copy. Close the image now. Hit Control L. That puts her as a layer in here. Okay. Now what I'd start to do is, because my edits on any layer are independent of the other layers, I can just grab my little freehand selection tool here and start taking out huge amounts of this background. Okay. This is how pretty much we all get started. Okay, just taking out background. Eventually, you're going to look for ways to do this better, cleaner, automatically, ways that don't involve the eraser brush I'm about to show you. Let's go ahead and take a look at that now. So I've taken out big bits here. The next thing I'm going to want to do is grab an eraser brush. I've got a size for my eraser brush there, and start erasing background. And this can take a while, and it's hard. But I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you don't have the patience to go in and do this a few times on some avs, then maybe you should find another hobby. We all start with this eraser brush. When you're done with this eraser brush, you'll know. But don't think you should start without it. Because you learn so much about what your program behaves like. It's like learning to play a game or ride a bike. You can call this your training wheels. Okay? So I use a combination of these two tools. I'll get in as good as the eye can get without really making a huge mistake. And then I'll go ahead here with my eraser brush. Just start hitting the edges. A couple of tips here: making sure all these pictures are of a similar tone and color value really does make a lot of difference in how hard that process is. Don't expect to get these results as quickly as this. You're going to spend your time, you're going to skin your knees a few times. There's no shame in that. Okay. Just a little bit here and then we'll move on. Okay. So, again, we can do all sorts of things to this, but you get the idea in that now we have 3 layers. We're going to create a 4th layer. I hope you went through and watched my other video on our types of different graphics. What I'm actually going to do here is create another layer, but I'm actually going to create a vector layer, okay? And my vector layer here, I'm just going to make a nice kind of dark gray box around her. Okay. So now I've got this dark gray box. For the sake of argument, I'm just going to make it thicker. Okay. So I've got this dark gray box here at this point. Now the reason that I actually deal with these vector objects so much when it comes to, blocking things out is I may decide down the line that I don't like where this ends, and I'm going to want to bring that up. And if I'm doing this in vectors, okay, with my shapes to shape things out, I'm not going to get a lot of image distortion. So you probably noticed that when I was doing the font demo in the vector graphics one. So this is kind of the basics of what you're looking at here. Okay, I can obviously do a few other things with it, but I'm going to try one last thing with this, just as a demo on basic layers. Is I grabbed a image of some handwriting here. I'm going to grab it, Control A, Control C. I'm going to paste that as a new layer with Control L. It's on top of everything else. Now I'm going to set this layer blend mode to darken. And if you see that, all it's doing is showing the things that are darker than what's underneath it. Okay. And again, since I've got the ability to manipulate every layer independent of every other one, I can adjust my brightness and contrast on the handwriting. To really make it pop out. And then of course I can fade the opacity of that layer. If I grab my eraser brush right now, I can just erase the writing that's over her. It's kind of a basic idea of what we're doing when we're using layers, is the ability to create like this. Okay, this is something we wouldn't be able to do without the layers. But there you go, kind of an example of what we can do. Now, some of the other things at this point is I can grab that writing layer and move it underneath things. I could absolutely move that writing underneath her. Okay? So there's a lot of different things we can do at that point. That's it. Basics on layers in Paint Shop Pro. Hope that helps.